So yeah, we are talking about Prisoner of Azkaban today. And last week I kind of enjoyed just kind of the general everybody's thoughts on the book. So what does everybody think? Your just general feelings on book 3 or movie 3, I guess if that's. I can start by saying this one's always been my favorite.
Yeah.
Well, book 6 is right up there, but it's a little longer. This is the most rereadable one that I just really, the way it twisted and turned, the time turner, all of those little details I just thought were just so cool, and they still are. So this is one of my favorite ones to like just exist in. It's a fun world. So.
Well, it's kind of fun to start to get to past, the history of Harry's parents and kind of get to know them a little bit and that group.
Yeah.
And I always think the Marauders map is, I think, my favorite magic item in the series.
It's pretty darn cool.
Yeah, there's a lot revealed in this one about Harry's dad and friends and what was going on when Harry got his scar, and so that's why I think it is such a good one.
That's true. It expands the world a lot. That's a good point. Yeah. Want more? Want more? Yeah. Okay. He's eating like half of a pound of meatloaf right now, I think so. Which is good. All right, I'm gonna share screen. Let's see how much I can mess it up. You can see that, yes?
Yep.
Okay, very good. So this week we're kind of looking at broader themes. This was a tough one. I think maybe it's because Anna and I like it so much, but it was really hard to like find one track to chase down. So I would be curious, like we're kind of talking about the line between good and evil, and we're talking about a lot of different things that branch off from that. But I guess before we get too far into it, what themes or what things come to mind for you all if you think about this book or this year? Are there big themes or ideas that come to mind right away?
I couldn't think of anything, so I was interested to see what you came up with.
I mean, there's definitely a theme of things are not as they appear. So you see that with Scabbers and with Lupin and with Sirius, of course, and then also with Buckbeak and that whole thing. And so I think that's part of why the time turner is so intriguing, because it sort of helps uncover a little bit of that anyway, so that other people can see, or maybe at least undo some of the harm done when people keep behaving like what they see is actually what's really happening. I don't really know how to say it.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Yeah. I just remember being just completely floored by the Scabbers thing the first time.
Right.
I read it. It's like what a 3-book setup. You're just like this
Right.
annoying mouse that's just dumb and is always in the wrong spot and doing the weird things, and then suddenly it ends up being like the linchpin of the entire series, basically. Really.
Yeah.
Things are not as they seem, indeed. Well said. So Anna pulled this quote from her book on Christian doctrine. The evil we do to each other has 3 dimensions. It's always a rebellion against God and the order of God's good creation. It's always indifference of enmity towards our fellow human beings. And it's always the self-destructive contradiction of what we ourselves were created to be. The worst form of evil, in other words, is a moral evil that expresses itself as sin. So we're going to be kind of talking about sin, essentially. in this, and I think it kind of plays out a lot of different ways. We're going to be looking specifically at the characters you see listed there: Sirius, Fred and George, the Professor, Peter, Buckbeak, Crookshanks, and then an omelet recipe, which the phrase you have to break some in order to make an omelet, you have to break some eggs, which in my mind I think about Avengers Age of Ultron, which probably nobody else does because nobody liked that movie as much as me, but Tony Stark does make that reference there. But it's relevant to our conversation here. So we're kind of in particular looking at some of the injustices in the book, and then the hope that blossoms from Expecto Patronum. So, all right. So, just put this. Oops. Whole. Oh, really? Okay.
Do I have to answer that question?
the first question you have to answer is list all of the sins. This is a confession. So when you hear the word sin, what do you think of? Well, what is sin, or what is evil, and what role does it play in our lives? Just kind of combine those first three questions. What do you think when you think of the word?
Well, I was raised in the church, and so I always think it's missing the mark.
Yeah.
Because, that's how they always say. That's literally what the word means. So that's where my brain goes first.
Oh.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
You miss, like if you're shooting an arrow at a target and you just miss the mark, it's a sin. That's where it first came from, I think.
Yeah, that's right.
So that's what I was always taught. But in a larger sense, obviously, I think it's just basically when we screw up.
Yeah. So when you think about sin in our lives, Lara, do you think about it as something that we're doing intentionally, or something that's just occurring, or both, I guess?
I am a control freak, so I guess I would tend to lean towards it's something that it's our choice to do it.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, certainly there are plenty of times where I'd like to say, I couldn't help it. It just happened that way. But I kind of like to believe I had some choice in it, because then it gives me hope that I have choice to not do it again.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's true. Anybody else have any thoughts on sin initially? I know it's kind of a loaded, large topic.
Yeah.
So I am having a hard time controlling my screen with my mouse, so that's fine. So looking at that 1 through 10 scale, where do you think you fall on that in terms of how much we should consider sin a concern?
I think we are human, therefore we sin. And while I agree with Laura that we should try to control whether or not we are sinning, some of our sin is because of the society that we live in. And I don't mean that to pass it off, but in order to be able to survive in our society, we have to drive cars that are ruining creation, and there's just some of it that we can't completely control unless we give up, which maybe that's what we should do, is just give up everything, but tend not to do that because we like living inside and such things as eating. So I don't know on the scale though, but then we know with as a Christian theology, we know and we believe that Jesus died on the cross to forgive us of our sins and wipe us clean of of our sins.
Yeah.
So,
Mhm. Yeah.
So while we should be concerned of it, I am, you know, certain of my forgiveness of those
Right.
sins.
There you
So,
go. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
so toss it up in the air and catch which egg that does not break.
Mhm.
You want me to get it? No, move it away. Sorry, was somebody getting ready to talk? I'm sorry. Okay. Yeah, I think that sin is really an interesting thing for Christians, especially because there's such a big onus put on it in like the capital C, like the whole church. And there's everything that we read about when we read about what Christians are, it always seems to come back to like this idea of us being miserable, broken people who sin, and I have trouble with that because I like to think that God likes me all right, but I also understand the especially as Presbyterians, the total depravity comes from our friend Calvin's tulip, the idea that we are not enough without Jesus' salvation, like you mentioned. So there is sin is important, but we also have a more important thing that we have hope in, and that's the resurrection, and that's kind of I think a little bit of the framework that we're going to be kind of looking at some of these happenings through. So that's the quote again. Setting up. Okay, perfect. Okay, so I'm just going to have these up. I'm not going to read them out loud because you guys can all see them, okay? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
If there's any of these that you want to look at or want to answer, I'd love to hear some thoughts on any of them. That way we don't have to go through each one of them individually if we don't want to, but or clarifications if you need.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll start. I like to start at the bottom,
Okay.
or that's when it at least resonates a little bit with me in terms of the question of what were we created to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I really, and you can probably predict where I'm going to go with this, Lane.
Yes.
But I've talked about this Bible Project podcast that I listen to, and they talk about us, being in the image of God. Part of that being co-creators with God, not equal partners, but almost middle management, if you will, where where God is the chief executive and we're middle management. We have responsibilities, not a whole lot of authority, and by sinning and doing evil and that kind of thing, we're not living up to what our created purpose was or what it means to be an image of God.
Mm-hmm.
At least in my mind.
Yeah, good. That's good. That's a good thought.
Well, I'll talk
and
about
it is
the
interesting.
second.
Oh, go ahead, Laura.
No. Go ahead.
No, I already said my piece. You're good.
All I was going to say was the second section there. If I understand enmity correctly, is enmity like hate?
I had to look it up. It says the state or feeling of being actively opposed or hostile to someone or something.
Okay. So in my mind, the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I see indifference and enmity, and the definition that Michelle just read kind of confirms that for me, because it's an active opposition to something, which means you actually care about that enough to do something against it. So the difference between the two for me is indifference is worse because you don't even care enough to take a position against it.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
That is, yeah, I think it's well said. I also believe that the second bullet is a coping mechanism. If anyone was going to, I don't think coping mechanisms are things. But,
They are now.
they are now. Oliver, can you play with the hats by yourself for a couple minutes?
Yeah.
Here you go. We have yellow Play-Doh is all that remains, because all the other ones have been eaten by the dog or hardened. Oliver, here. And he likes putting them like small hats in all of his toys. And then you take them off, and then we do it again. Yeah. So it's on the ground. It's okay. It's on the ground. So.
Oh no.
But that's what we are created to be, little hat makers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually think that that indifference and hate thing is it's really interesting, and I think that we see it in a lot of the things that we're dealing with in culture and in our society today, and in the pandemic and everything. There's not, you can tell if when you stop caring about something, that's when you really are doing it. And that's why I think there's all of pretty much any hot topic issue that comes up in politics or in faith or in anything. Oliver, you need to do it yourself over there for a little bit, okay? Comes from that notion that at the very least we can agree that every side of the argument has a very passionate, deep care about something, which I guess counts for something. So let's just talk for a moment about rebellion against God, just so we've touched on all three of these. What do you think about rebellion against God?
I would say it feels like shame, because you know that you should think differently or you should do differently, but yet you are choosing not to.
Papa, Mama.
That's good. Yeah,
Mommy.
What are you looking? What I'm trying to understand your question. What does a good creation have to do with evil?
So how is there evil in good creation?
How are we as good creations? What do we have to do with evil?
Yeah, or vice versa. Yeah. Just walk carefully with it, please. All right, so we're gonna start trying to piece this together. All right, so now we have we have a couple. Sorry. Oliver, I need you to find a different piece of Play-Doh. I need you to sit over there and work on it, okay? All right, so I have this up on the screen. We're going to talk a little about the Martyrs map, which is a part that is also amazing, and ties our friends Fred and George with the initial troublemakers of Hogwarts. So,
Yeah.
Slowly.
He doubted whether Fred and George had ever been innocent.
All right, so we have a couple quotes here. Excuse me. And then the second one is in the where was it? Is it the Shrieking Shack? Is that's what it's called, right? Where they yeah. So which of these so these, well, this is going to be kind of self-answerable probably, but so both these kind of represent a lack of innocence. Sorry, he's a lot louder today.
Right.
So when we look at Peter Pettigrew's little paragraph here, we're dealing with a bigger sin, a bigger potential evil, but also something that that if a human is put in a situation, you don't know. I think it's fair to not necessarily know for sure if you would be able to do that. It's like I like to read. Every time I read this, I like to side with Sirius, but at the same time, I've never had my life threatened directly like that before. So,
Yeah. Well, that's just, we were talking in the men's group, we're reading C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity, and that stems from a series of radio talks that Lewis gave during World War II. And of course, there were lots of allusions then to the war and to Nazi Germany, which in our group, it always leads to questions about, well, why did the German people go along with Hitler?
mm-hmm.
You know, and my thinking is, you see enough families drug out in the street and shot, you tend to maybe go along.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's kind of to your point of, it's easy for me to sit here safely in my little office right now.
Yeah. Yeah. But this is also like, this becomes a core, this is like a core idea of the entire Harry Potter series. The idea that there's no greater love than laying down your life for your friends. So this is like the in some ways what Peter did was create the kind of like the most unforgivable sin, at least in the eyes of Albus Dumbledore, which would be to sacrifice his friends over himself. So is this...
Sorry. Stop.
So is this then... So what Fred and George do in their, like, what we know about them, are they sinning? Are they doing evil in their shenanigans?
That raises the question for me, what is the difference?
Mm-hmm.
I know that there's a difference, or I perceive the difference, but I can't define the difference very easily. Is it degree? Is it intent? Is it...
Right.
I don't know.
I would say that George and Fred, are not setting out to hurt anyone, whereas Peter, sorry, trying to play with you right now. I'm just trying to quiet you down. Yes, while I feel like Peter's actions completely hurt so many people, whereas Fred and George's actions, they're always so careful. I mean, they're just such little tiny things that are just, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think that Bentley, cut it out. The other child has now entered the room. Hey, this is going to be one of the more compelling audio listen.
Good luck.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and I don't have like I think the answer of, you know, where do we draw the line, and or how do we define that is kind of open to interpretation. I mean, there's no doubt George and Fred have injured people with their pranks. That's kind of the part of the funny physical comedy of their characters, but also they're doing it out of a place of entertainment, and then, you know, and that's a whole nother conversation that may not be for this, but it's something that, you know, is harm for entertainment, good or not. But we look at Peter, and he had intent and he had option, and he made a choice, a life choice, kind of, to put him in a position of a larger sin. So come here.
Can I ask just a real quick question?
Yeah, please.
So I think there's a wider gulf between Fred and George and Peter Pettigrew. We learn, I can't remember if I'm only halfway through this book. I don't know if we learn more about James and Sirius in what they were like at Hogwarts in this book, or maybe in a later book. But they seem to be somewhere in between. They were mischievous, but then there were times that they were deliberately doing harm. There's a time that I can't remember who, maybe it's James, who turned, you know, Sirius, levitated him and turned him upside down so that his robes fell.
Oh yeah.
And exposed him, and those kinds of things. And so maybe that's kind of closer to that line of evil.
Yes, I think so. Bentley, stop. Yeah, I think that's actually kind of an interesting. Now, stop it. Stop. No. Okay. Gotta get the dog neutered. That'll help. Yeah, I think that there's definitely there's the bridge there, and I feel like a lot of times J.K. Rowling is kind of trying to put those two kind of pairs
Mm-hmm.
together in our minds to see
Mm-hmm.
the like more humanity in Fred and George, and I really kind of like that they don't make James look like a saint.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's really important, and I think it's very it matches our Bible stories too, where we have characters that are aggressively human. There's a lot of redeeming qualities, but then they sleep with a woman because she was bathing on a roof, and then they kill her husband by sending him to the front lines and all sorts of things like that. So there's very deeply human qualities that are established in that, which I think is good. But yeah, I think you're right. That might be a good bridge there to look at, as well as because I do think what they did to Snape was bullying. It wasn't a prank.
Yeah.
It was
Mm-hmm.
them choosing that shame, that against good creation kind of thing, where you're choosing to exploit something that is good by doing something evil to it. So that's a good thought. Okay, so let's see if I can move this so I can read this better. All right, so Dante. Is everybody kind of familiar with Dante's Inferno?
Yeah.
Okay, so I will read this one just so we're all tracking at the same time. At the base of the well, Dante finds himself within a large frozen lake, Cocytus, the ninth circle of hell, trapped in the ice. Each according to his guilt are punished sinners guilty of the treachery against those with whom they had special relationships. The lake of ice is divided into 4 concentric rings or rounds of traitors, corresponding in order of seriousness to betrayal of family ties, community ties, betrayal of guests, and of lords. This is in contrast to the popular image of hell as fiery. The treacheries of these souls were denials of love, which is God, and of all human warmth. Only the remorseless dead center of ice will serve to express their natures. As they were denied God's love, so are they furthest removed from the light and warmth of his Son. As they denied all human ties, so are they bound only by the unyielding ice. This final deepest level of hell is reserved for traitors, betrayers, and oath breakers. So this is our Peter Pettigrew conversation. So in this, it kind of lays it out. But what do you think about the idea of traitors, betrayers, and oath or covenant breakers being like the worst sinners? What are your feelings on that? Like Peter compared to somebody like trying to think of like Malfoy or something like that. Somebody who is
Well, I think
because you can see Malfoy. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think it goes a lot with intent. You're intentionally breaking your oath or betraying someone, because when you're a traitor, you're going in to find the secrets and then to give them to someone's enemy, or it takes a lot of deception in order to do those things.
Jeremy, did you have something you wanted to add?
Well, I was just going to say, in comparing Peter Pettigrew to Malfoy, I think everybody can see Malfoy coming and take steps and avoid Malfoy. And the other thing too, I think betrayal is such a big thing for people, even just kind of from a biological or an evolutionary standpoint, just because we've evolved to have complex societies, or societies or community with each other, which are based on trust and cooperation for the well-being of all of each other.
Yeah.
And breaking that trust, thinking back, thousands, millions of years ago to, our ancient human ancestors was kind of it was a life or death kind of thing in many cases. So
yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said about, you're only as good as your word. And if you break what you say you're going to do or how you're going to be, that's a huge, it's a huge sin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's another thing that this series really, like, I think that kind of goes to that, the way that they have the spells that requires one which is literally how Voldemort finds out, because there's a spell that that requires that one person carries the secret, and we see this come up over and over again. And there is this is a built-in component of the evolution in the wizarding community, basically. Then, right, the same thing that you were just mentioning, this idea that you have to survive as a community and you can't keep a secret alone. So betrayal is even worse, because it's not just somebody taking and sharing your thoughts, but it's somebody you gave those thoughts to in confidence. And that's what I think that, and then it becomes a lot more emotional. And I can think of times in my life when I had people that I was close to who I trusted, and even if it was silly things like high school drama and things like that, but it didn't change the fact that it's really sucked to have somebody that I trust tell, you hear something from, I don't know, I'm thinking of like a girl that I had a crush on when I was like 16 or something, and suddenly I tell my friend, and then 2 days later somebody else comes up to me and talks to me about it. That kind of stinks. And that is nothing compared to this, obviously, but there is an innate idea that when you tell somebody something like that, you expect that to be held with like a sacred word. So then that kind of makes me think about covenant stuff. In the Bible, we have a lot of language that humanity and God are tied together through a promise. And humans all inevitably always break it, because that's what we do. But does that mean, I guess in reading this, then does that mean how does God, I don't know, I always hesitate to say how does God feel when we do that, because we're trying to assign emotions to a being that
Yeah.
But are we betrayers and traitors and oath breakers just by our nature then? I guess in a way. All right, let's see. All right, so now we have a little bit more here of a parallel here between Matthew 26 and a quote about Voldemort. So we're going to see some parallels happening here when it comes to betrayal. So I'm just going to pause and let you kind of peruse both of those for a moment.
I'm trying to remember where this comes up. Is this one of Trelawney's prophecies?
Yeah.
Yes.
Or did she just have the one? Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, yeah, I should have noted that, yeah.
That's okay.
So, Judas and Peter Pettigrew. What do you think? It's kind of different, but there's this sense of the betrayal that Jesus experienced, I think, would have been, well, I mean, it's essentially, I mean, it is very similar to what Lily and James experienced, in the sense that someone, but, you know, obviously there's contingencies with the fact that Jesus already knew that that was going to happen and blah, blah, blah. But just, we're kind of looking out on the surface, this idea of a betrayer happening, coming from within, and what causes, and I was reading an article about the fall of empires, because that feels relevant these days. And there's like, they were talking about essentially like most empires fall from within. And then, so that got me thinking, what was the rationale for Peter was to live, right? He didn't want to die. And Judas was looking for what?
Can't remember.
He got some money thrown his way.
Silver, yeah.
Oh, sure.
But I think that my guess is he expected, just like Peter, they probably both expected a level of power within those who won. So, and I think a lot of times when you look at empires, or you look at, I mean, even if you look at sports dynasties, as I'm saying this, I'm realizing that the article I read was actually about sports dynasties, and they just related it to old empires. But the idea that that a lot of you choose to leave because you realize that something is about to go from conqueror to conquered. And so Peter sees Lily and James with their child and realizes that they're about to be conquered. And so what better time for him to be the one who hands them over, so that he can be the right hand of the new power. And I don't know, we can't really speak for Judas in terms of that, but I mean, if you're doing that for money and it's visible like that, it's a political move that he made to do that to Jesus. So when we look at betrayals and we look at kind of this idea of sin, is the sin the relational choice to not be of your word, or is it the power or what you seek after it? Because Anna and I have talked about this before. In the garden, we talk about the first sin being eating of the fruit. But then there's also the idea that really the first sin is that the humans no longer, they basically betray each other to God. And is that the first sin? That act of mutual she made me eat it. Well, there's suddenly this he said, she said that comes out. So are we talking about, when we talk about betrayal and we talk about sin, are we talking about the act or the element of the humanity that kind of goes with it? Hold on. Let's see. I think we're on to our omelet now. Yes.
Right.
Get out of there. Oliver, are you done eating? Just looked over and the dog was eating meatloaf off of Oliver's plate. A very normal night. Okay. So this is also a quote from the Christian Doctrine book, which is kind of funny, but so I'm going to read this one out loud just so I can hear it spoken out loud again too. Eggs have to be broken if you want to make an omelet. If we look far enough ahead, we can see that evil contributes to good and so is not really evil at all. A war that slaughters millions of people can bring peace. If a church refuses to welcome and minister to some objectionable people who drive its membership away, it can grow financially, numerically, and thus increase its influence in society. Political and economic policies that hurt people can contribute to the welfare of most people. But even if some good does sometimes come from evil, does that make evil good? What kind of God would create a world in which wrong and infliction of suffering and the law of progress towards right? So, do you really have to break some eggs to make an omelet? And this is kind of just the idea of evil, I think, in general.
Yeah.
I read a lot of things about this era of time that we live in right now, and a lot of them say, "Man, here's the things that are going to come of this that are so great. Look at like what society might do. Look at the lack of smog over Los Angeles. Look at all of these things that are happening. Maybe it'll change our lifestyle." And obviously, we are nowhere near being able to answer that. But that's not that saying that is privileged in the sense that you're not really probably somebody saying that. It's not somebody that's experiencing job loss or experienced death or experienced some sort of hardship with this. So, but I'm also guilty of that. I think we probably all do it in some ways. But after the Cedar Rapids flood in 2008, I remember how much downtown Cedar Rapids was terrible, and now people go to it. And I heard a lot of people say when I lived there, like, man, that flood, it really was bad, but thank goodness it happened because it allowed Cedar Rapids a fresh start. And so even things like that, do you think that evil can negate itself by the good that comes out of it?
I don't think it negates it.
I agree.
And please take my silence here to mean I'm thinking a lot. Not that I'm not engaged.
Oh no, you're good.
Yeah, these are big things to think about.
This
They
is
are really
Yeah,
this
they
is
are.
a really tricky book, as you can see, Jeremy. I'm interested to see what ideas you've come up with. We're struggling, and the ideas that come up are very large.
No, this is good. This is great.
But you think about
This is going to be a good topic to reflect on this week.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm thinking about so we have injustice in some ways, like Sirius Black was put in jail for a very long time and then escaped, which is wrong, but did so because he was wrongfully accused. And then you have Buckbeak, who was also about to be put to death and then was
wrongfully accused.
Yes, wrongfully accused, dang it. And we talked about a little bit last week too, with Hagrid being wrongfully, there's a lot of injustice that happens for people who are different, or creatures who are different. And some of the choices I think that the characters make, they're not necessarily evil, but they go against what would be considered right in the society that they live in. So what do we do with things like that too? Jesus did that too, I guess. So maybe that's the answer to our question. But
I guess I don't.
Well, I was thinking about the. Go ahead, Laura. Sorry.
No, you go this time.
I was just going to say, it's just kind of interesting to think of, Hagrid, for example, being put in Azkaban for 2 months in the Chamber of Secrets. And the people in that, the ministry thought that they were doing the right thing in large part. I don't think they had an evil intent, unless, there's some folks like Fudge who are maybe just trying to cover their backsides a little bit politically. That'd be the sin. But anyway, that's all I have.
Laura?
I was going to say that I don't like to go down the path of good things come out of suffering, or good things come from evil acts, because it to the victim of the suffering or the evil act, that sounds like a horrible platitude that is not helpful. So even though in a larger sense I might believe in a grander sort of everything can work together eventually to do good.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't like the flip side of that, and so I have a hard time reconciling the two.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
That's very fair, and I think that we always, and I think we're usually especially guilty of it as Christians, of saying that, well, God has this all figured out, or so, you know, like there's a lot of language that I use we as like Christians use to say like, well, it's, you know, it's all good, God's got us. Okay, well, if you if you've lost somebody from this, or you don't have a job and you can't get your unemployment or something like that, it's your experience is valid, and your experience is real, and it's kind of, so I don't know if that's exactly an equivalent of what you're talking about, but I agree with you that I think we have to be careful of the people who are actually in those situations, to not make a statement that negates them or justifies something that is quite bad. And I think right now we're seeing that a little bit in you know, what I forget, for about 23 hours of the day, that this is an election year still because of everything that's going on. But we have, you know, sexual assault accusations that now exist for both presidential candidates. And there's a lot of different justifications that happen from everybody, in terms of trying to, and I think that not enough ever gets put on the victim as a person who is actually, it was actually very hard to come forward and make that statement. Nor do I understand how somebody would want to do that just for fun. So I think that it's we need to take seriously the words of people who have evil acted upon them, instead of just trying to find the silver lining of it too. So I think that's a wise place for us to reflect too. Go ahead, Michelle, sorry.
I think that's my hardest part with the information on the screen right now, is the word evil. Because I think about, you know, when we talk about suffering, like, and I'm going to go back to my own childhood, like my dad worked at Deere's until the layoffs in the 80s, and then he got laid off, and he spent a lot of years unemployed while he was going back to school. And so I have a very close relationship with him, because he was a stay-at-home dad during that time. And I wouldn't have had that relationship with him, I don't think, if he hadn't been laid off. So, you know, did something, in my opinion, good come out of the situation? Absolutely. But during the time when we were suffering, it did not, you couldn't see that there was any good coming out of it. You know, it was a very dark time for my parents.
Yeah.
But, you know, looking back on it as a child, I had no idea that we were destitute. You know, but so yeah, it's I mean, and losing your job to me is not evil.
Right, I agree.
It's a kind of suffering, because we didn't have money for anything, but it was not evil. Like, so that's it's just that word evil I'm having trouble with. Sorry.
Nope, I think that makes sense. I think that's a fair, and I think some of probably, I can't move. I'm in a meeting. Remember? He wants me to go. He's giving me a back massage with his feet right now.
Nice.
Oliver, where do you want
So
me
I
to?
think, I'm sorry, I'm going to continue on with my thought process. So I think if we go back to Dante and his, you know, layers of hell, I think you have to look at the different definitions of evil. There are different layers of evil, I would say. That makes sense. Like Dante has different levels of hell. There's different levels of evil.
Find my way to. Yeah, I think maybe I may have kind of convoluted it by using language of losing job to mean evil, because I think you bring up a good point that when we use that word, it does shift some of the the meaning of it, whether we intended to or not. So that's a good point.
And I would kind of make a distinction too between, and I think we've talked about, or some people have mentioned this in terms of people making good or good situations coming out of evil, and evil causing the good or creating the good.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the goods that come out of evil could have come out of other situations that weren't evil. Thinking to the downtown Cedar Rapids thing.
Yep.
They could have revitalized downtown Cedar Rapids. Had a bond and done it in a way in which people didn't have to suffer.
Right.
But choices were made not to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's another piece of it.
Right. Well, and then, I mean, both of those, both talking about unemployment, and I guess that there are some systemic things that are inherently evil that we deal with societally, or at least in terms of how they benefit, or like choices that people make whether it's policies or whatever, to choose to revitalize something or not, or how we handle unemployment and things like that, I guess maybe you can make a larger argument are good or evil or whatever, because they benefit people differently. But I think that that's a good point, that it's the ends justify the means kind of thing, which isn't always the case. So I wanted to talk a little bit about thank you very much, Dementors and the Patronus, because I think that kind of fits that cold ninth ring of hell that Dante was talking about. So the representation of Dementors in these books are always cold and soulless, and they're just void of happiness, right? That's kind of the and then when you conjure a Patronus, you have to have a powerful will of joy and of a powerful memory or something to bring. So there's a lot of work that she does to really establish how important both of those things are. And I kind of just want to see, what do you all think of Dementors and like that, just the idea of all of those two things? What comes to mind thematically if you're thinking about it in terms of your faith, or in terms of kind of what we've talked about? Does it tie to anything in your head?
Dementors are always very scary to me.
Yes.
I mean,
Terrifying.
Yeah. And I would equate them with evil.
Maybe that was too much of a lobbed question. My bad.
Yeah. Well, and another aspect of them is that we don't know it. We don't know a lot about their nature, in the sense of all we see is kind of the cloak shape and all that, but we don't really know what's inside. And so, as Laura was alluding to last week about fear and hate and anger and all that, there's plenty to be afraid of in there too, just because we don't understand what's going on behind there.
Yeah, good point. I think that it kind of goes to what Laura mentioned about indifference too. There's the Dementors don't care. They're not told. I mean, the only way they're told to do something is because they're put on an island filled with people and told that they're prisoners. Like, there's not a directive of you should dislike these people, but they just go after souls, and there's not a level of and I think that you think about, to me, when I think about hell or like real pure evil and things like that, I think about being completely separate, or completely separated from God or from others, depending on if we're talking about love. And I think that's why when we talk about quarantine and we talk about what we're going through right now, it's hard for people because there is a feeling of separation. And once you start having that separation, that's what can lead to those feelings of I'm sure that we've all had a Dementor-like feeling just being away from people. And I think that she describes it really well, but it's this, if we think about that separation from God, like that cold kind of soul sucking thing, and I think that's why maybe I just like when the first time a Patronus showed up, I was like, this is the coolest. Of all of the things that I wanted to do, I wanted so badly to know what kind of animal my
Yeah.
Yeah.
because when that stag showed up, or man, it's so cool. I don't even know what a stag was, but it's just such a cool, hopeful image. That so when you have this, so if we go with that theme of this unknown, faceless, indifferent evil that separates us from our bodies and from the people we love, then a Patronus, this like embodiment of memories, becomes this this like almost resurrection like hope of how do we conquer darkness. And I think that I don't know, I'm kind of processing that as I'm saying it, so it might just be nonsense, but I just wanted to mention that and see if anybody had anything, reflections or any thoughts on those characters, because I think that those are deeply tied to themes of faith and themes of the human condition.
Part of me wonders, I'd like to know more about the nature of the Dementors. Are they evil, or is it that's just their nature, kind of like a shark? They attack people on the beaches because it's their nature to eat. But we do know, I mean, regardless of the nature of the Dementor, in my mind, the ministry is evil because they are aware of the nature of the Dementors and they still use them for this purpose.
Yeah.
The ministry is supposed to be in control of them.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And we find out later they're not doing a very good job of that. But J.K. Rowling uses a lot of imagery that we are very much aware of. Like the Dementors always remind me so much of the Grim Reaper and the White Patronus as the as like angels coming to save. That you pull these angels out of your wand in order to save the people. So that I don't know, that's always the imagery I have seen when I read it. Granted, my mind doesn't always work like everybody else's, but
I like that.
That was the way I always thought about them.
Yeah.
What I like about the Patronus charm is that it requires the witch or wizard to have, like Lane was saying, a sense of strong will and belief in the happy memory or the happy thought, or it requires not just confidence, but actually a strong will. And that is like if you ever want to teach your kids something, like one life lesson, like that's like a wonderful life lesson. Like you just have to believe in yourself, and you have to have strong will to believe you can do it. And that's part of the reason I love the Patronus charm.
And this is just fresh in my mind because I just read this part last night, but kind of in a similar vein as the Bogart, right? And the ridiculous charm, where you have to be confident and strong and think of something funny. To turn that Bogart away.
Yeah.
So she uses that in a couple places, I think.
Yeah.
This book just it cracks open the world so much. There's just so many new things that come that are born out of it that are absolutely essential to everything in the next four. And I think that the thematically, the way that it's set up and all of this work that we're kind of doing right now, we can have a conversation about good and evil and about sin and have it kind of lay over the entire series, and it would be just as relevant. But in this book, I think we just have such an interesting perspective because we have the focus at the end is on two characters who were wrongfully accused of something, and One was given a capital punishment, and one was essentially given the same but escaped. So I guess I don't even know how to ask I don't know what the question is exactly. How do we as what do we? I've stumped myself. As faithful people, as readers of this series, what do we like? What do you think we are to take away from the ending of this book? I guess maybe that's where we start. Because J.K. Rowling spends a lot of time setting this up, but doesn't need to necessarily. I mean, obviously, we could say this every week. The reason she does it, the reason it's so successful is because she chooses to set all of it up so well. But what do you think about the end? What do you think that how does it inform our faith?
And I guess at the end, in a way, Buckbeak and Sirius Black are both redeemed. Or I don't know if redeemed's the right word, though, since they were wrongly accused and they didn't actually do it.
Right.
Never mind.
Well, but in the eyes of society, they're still redeemed. I think that's still okay.
Yeah.
I mean.
Yeah.
I don't really want to use the word justice either, but it was injustice for Sirius to be in Azkaban, and he escaped or was set free from injustice. Buckbeak was unjustly sentenced to be murdered, and put to death, and they were able to he was able to escape as well.
Yeah. So the characters that we follow are the ones kind of doing all of this. And I think this kind of goes to that initial, or maybe that was last week, the idea that people like children and people who read these books are like become inherently slightly better humans to other humans. And I think about this idea that even just being, because Harry was not, he was afraid of Sirius. He was afraid of what was going to happen, and he was angry at Sirius because he believed what had happened. And there is like all of these emotions that are very rational, very logical, very fair human emotions for him to feel. And then for him to choose to trust him and listen to him. And then you think about Sirius being, you have a person who's been in jail for 11, 12 years at this point, right? That would, because Harry would be 13, I think, in this book.
Yeah.
And his main, what got him through was to be like, he wanted to get to Harry, and he wanted to like make things right. And that's the opposite of Peter Pettigrew. So there's a foil happening again that we see a lot. And the opposite of betraying your friends is spending your entire life protecting them. And then I think one of the biggest surprises in the series was finding out that was basically Snape was basically the biggest person that did that the entire series.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know about you guys. It actually kind of made me mad when I first read it. I was like, "Are you kidding me? You've made me hate this guy for my whole life."
Yeah.
And now you're telling me that he's actually the best guy?
Yeah.
That's what makes it so perfect.
No. I'm such a normal human because I feel that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kidding me? Don't name your kid after him. He was so mean to you. But I do kind of struggle with that. Albus Severus, I don't know. But but I think I think that Snape might be the best, and we see so many instances where Harry's dad was like actively torturing Snape, like you mentioned. Like
Mhm.
James and Sirius were not nice,
Mm-mm.
and in those ways, I don't know if they really were living out what Gryffindor asks of them, but
they were
Well,
teenagers, and they were teenage boys, and
yeah.
their frontal lobes were undeveloped.
yes,
Yes.
that's a very classic
Yeah.
youth response. That's good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're right.
Teenage boys are not the smartest things.
Oh man,
Having been one once.
it's true.
Not that
But they're just like an extra level of power when you have a wand that can do anything.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's the
And they were very entitled. They felt like Sirius, and when you look at those flashbacks, Sirius and James just felt like they were entitled to everything that was around them, and they were entitled to make Sirius feel like a complete and total loser. And I don't necessarily see it so much as, I don't know, that they were just boys being boys. I see it as they were just being selfish and entitled, and didn't realize or couldn't see that their actions, or couldn't care that their actions were hurting someone else.
Yeah. Well, another aspect of that is
Arrogant. That's a good word.
yeah. And they were also pretty mean to Peter Pettigrew too, which raises the question: if they had treated Peter well, would we have a story?
That's right. That's right. Jeremy, you're always trying to end this series so much faster.
I know. Let's not mess around.
This is why Jeremy is not an author.
Yeah.
All right, I got to figure it out. Sirius, James, you just be nice to this guy. We don't have to worry about the Dark Lord coming back. The end.
Yeah.
But
Point page.
another character that we haven't talked about that I think is important to this idea of justice and maybe a larger idea of sin, Lupin.
Yeah.
A werewolf who otherwise,
I was thinking about that.
were it not for Dumbledore, maybe would not have a job in most places, would not be hired because of who he was. So, Jeremy, you said you're kind of thinking about that. Do you have something in mind in particular with Lupin?
Well, I think it demonstrates, and of course I finished the second book of Harry Potter this weekend, where Dumbledore, tells Harry, it's about your choices, right? Why didn't I do Slytherin? Well, because you chose Gryffindor. And I compare and contrast Lupin to Fenrir Greyback, and I can't remember when he shows up. I think later. But they're both werewolves, so it's in both of their natures as werewolves to hunt and attack and harm people. Fenrir Greyback revels in that and enjoys it and uses it for power and things like that.
Yeah.
Lupin does everything he can to control it and avoid the harm and those kinds of things.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of being a werewolf in this universe doesn't necessarily make you bad. It's the choices and what you do with the werewolf.
Yeah.
So intent.
Yeah.
Which goes back to our betrayal too a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
It kind of got me thinking about I was thinking about just like my application process for teaching employment because I was like, okay, this kind of is relevant because this guy is in the cursed Defense Against the Dark Arts position that turns over every year. But he would be a probably pretty high risk candidate for that job because once a month or however often the moon thing happens, that's not my field. Every 40 days, is that right? Whenever the moon is full, he becomes an insatiable
28 and a half.
Yeah. What'd you say, Michelle?
28 and a half, I believe.
Oh, okay. I guess that kind of makes sense.
Still a full moon.
Yeah. And then he has to be, I mean, he has to like quarantine himself basically. I think if I remember that part right, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So Dumbledore choosing to hire him, I think says a lot about Dumbledore, and says a lot about kind of some of that that intent too, because he chose the person that he felt was best, regardless of what other people might do. And I think you could ask the same, you could say the same thing, I guess, that you were talking about with Peter, Jeremy, and if between Lupin and Greyback, right?
Yeah, Fenrir Greyback. I think.
Yes, thank you. What made them different when they were, was it that Lupin had friends that just kind of razzed him, but were able to also change into animals that could wrestle with him, and whereas Greyback became who he was because he didn't have that support. He didn't have a system of people who would say, I accept you for who you are. Not only that, but I will meet you in that space. So I do think that there's kind of some really interesting dual characters that happen over and over again in this series that can kind of, but I think that both of those do speak to that intent. Lupin is choosing to do this, and Dumbledore is choosing to do that. And I mean, we're going to talk more about Dumbledore at some point, I promise. But he is admittedly kind of intentionally eccentric and chooses things out of amusement, I think. But but he would never do anything to put the students in danger. So you know that there's a level of trust there that I think is important for us as Christians and as humans to think about, how we handle people how we handle things or ideas or anything that are different from what we're used to, and how we do that. And I guess I'm tying this to my hiring process because even in my interview, because Cedar Rapids, Washington is a very diverse school, they had a lot of conversation. One of the second or third question they asked me about was what I thought about diversity in the classroom, and having to kind of unpack for a bunch of people that I never met the idea that who I am might actually be intimidating to some people in a diverse classroom, and how interesting that was for me to kind of think about, because it's something that I never would have thought about before. But Harry Potter kind of also puts us in this headspace to say, okay, well, what does who you are, like how do you use who you are to support your friends or love your friends or your neighbors? And I think that's really powerful, because Lupin becomes an agent of good, using the resources of what he is, and we see that with a lot of like Hagrid, and a lot of those people do that as well. So long-winded character study there.
No, and there's another interesting comparison, and let me know if you want to move on.
Nope, you're good.
That kind of gets into what Laura mentioned earlier about looks can be deceiving or deception. When you compare Gilderoy Lockhart with Remus Lupin.
Yeah. There you go.
It's interesting.
Do an entire series just on the different dark arts teachers.
Right?
They are all so important to every story, it seems like. And just like, and it took me the first 5 books to realize it, but like maybe I should start looking at these people. And
it gets even worse in the next book, deception-wise, just because then you've got I'm blanking on his name.
Mad-Eye.
Mad-Eye Moody.
And it's not Mad-Eye Moody.
Right.
Spoiler.
Yeah. It's Crouch.
Gosh, yeah, man.
Yeah.
Well, every time we finish, I always realize, like, man, there's just so many characters and so many things that we don't even get a chance to kind of look at all, and and part of the fun and also the trick with this is that since this is the first time we've done this, we're trying to figure out exactly whether or not trying to do bigger themes or trying to do character things are what works best. So as we go along, feel free to give feedback if you like, or if you want, if you think it'd be helpful to have more of something or less of something. We definitely want to hear it, because we have both been really excited about this, but we want to make sure that we're not, we don't get to the end of something and realize, oh, we never talked about Quirrell once, or even though he was the one carrying Voldemort on his back. But to kind of wrap up, so a lot of, I think, intent. I think you guys really did a good job of taking this a step further to kind of give us that intent idea to carry with us as we look at the other books and characters too, because I think it really does carry over a lot. Oliver agrees. So I think you've answered a lot of these. The omelet theory we kind of aren't fans of in a lot of ways, which is great. So if there's any of the first three that you feel like you want to add something to that we haven't, feel free. But I'd be curious to see what you thought of the worst sinner in The Prisoner of Azkaban is.
Yeah.
Basically what we talked about. Because as Christians, we're always trying to choose who's worse than us. So.
Yeah. That's the good thing. At least I'm not like Peter Pettigrew.
Right.
He's like, at least I'm not Lord Voldemort.
Yeah.
So do we think it's Peter Pettigrew?
Well, Peter Pettigrew, I mean, in the book, I don't think Voldemort doesn't play a prominent role or an active role in this, if I remember.
No, this is a setup.
I mean, is it Peter Pettigrew or is it the Ministry of Magic? Or kind of the two that I'm weighing in my mind.
Yeah. That's a good point. Especially with the...
In this book, it's got to be Peter to me. And in other books, I agree with Jeremy that it's definitely the ill management of the Ministry of Magic. So
that place is a mess.
It is.
Book number 5.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Dolores Umbridge. J.K. Rowling, she did a fantastic job with her, because I still hate Dolores Umbridge.
Oh yeah.
Oh my
She makes me
gosh.
so mad.
I cannot stand that woman.
Yep.
Oh man, I can remember exactly how where I was when I read that and stuff, because I was trying to figure out which of my teachers she was like and stuff when I read it. So. Which luckily there was not any direct comparisons, but
The girls had a principal that sounded just like Dolores Umbridge, and the three of us just could not stand the poor woman just because she sounded just like Dolores Umbridge.
Oh man.
It was terrible.
So looking ahead to next week, we're going to be, I feel like these books, they just ramp up really fast, and now we're going to be in some really evil, dark stuff. So about fire, we definitely have some elements of things are not as they seem, which I think is really interesting. An idea that I pitched to Anna, I don't know if this is the way we're going to go, probably isn't, but the predestination of Harry Potter being in the in the Triwizard Tournament, I thought was a very funny Calvinistic thing to talk about. But I'm not sure if I'm going to make you do a whole class talking about
predestination
based on the fact that somebody taking a potion to dress up like a crazy person being a Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher put Harry's name in it. But there's many different angles that we can go on that next week. I am excited to see where it goes. Are there any, Bentley, any prayer requests or anything in particular for anybody that we can pray for you this week?
Not for me.
Just that everybody continues to heal, and it'd be nice if our cases in Iowa could start going down.
Yeah, seriously. That's a problem right now. Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to say a prayer for us to close then.
Thank you.
God, we thank you for this group. We thank you for your word. Thank you for the art and the storytelling of many others through the years. And we give you thanks for the ability that we have to meet, even in times where we can't meet together, and discuss the way we see your word showing up in culture and in unexpected and new ways. Be with us as we continue to unpack what that means for us in this series, and what it means for us as humans and as followers of Christ. God, be with all of the medical first responders. Continue to be with them and protect them. Be with our delivery people, our sanitation people, all the people that take care of the things that we don't think about. We give you thanks for all of the ways that the grocery stores and other places continue to provide sustenance for our lives. Lift up all those that are sick. We lift up my dad, Anna. Continue to be with all of us. Protect us, keep us moving towards health, and bring us back safely and virtually next week, and in person sometime soon. In Jesus' name, amen.
Mm-hmm. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Lane.
Thank you all very much. I was told by Anna that there will be some predestination talk, but it won't be next week. So stay tuned.
Yeah. There's the whole of prophecies in book 5. So
there's so much. We're gonna have to. I don't know. It's gonna be fun. It's gonna be fun.
Yeah.
I'm amazed that we've kept them all to an hour and a half. So good job.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks everybody.
Thanks.
See you.
Bye.
Good to see y'all.
You too.
You too.